On a strip of sandy soil lies a county called Norfolk. It's Ontario, south coast, you know, and it's surely not remote. If you pass through or spend a day or decide to call it home, you'll see why we love it here and are proud to call it our own. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. Take in the small town atmosphere, be amazed at all that we grow. Like our kids that go and see the world and can't wait to return home. Drop a line in a placid lake or stroll along the shore. Take a tour on a peaceful country road and bound to be back for more. Of Norfolk, Norfolk, my southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger alone. With hard work we built a dream that only willing hands could do. It's on display at our fall fairs and at all the festivals too. Erie beaches, Carolinian forests, where the flower and dogwoods bloom. Patchwork fields and rolling hills, it's just the place for you. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger along. Norfolk, 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 you won't be a stranger along. On a strip of sandy soil lies a county called Norfolk. It's Ontario, south coast, you know, and it's surely not remote. If you pass through or spend a day or decide to call it home, you'll see why we love it here and are proud to call it our own. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. Take in the small town atmosphere, be amazed at all that we grow. Like our kids that go and see the world.
Morning, folks.
Return home. A line in a placid lake.
I wonder where Mr. Okay, good morning, and I would like to welcome everybody here this morning for our session. I'd like to get underway, please.
Principal voice.
You want my yard duty voice is what I need. All righty, so let's get down to business. Good morning, welcome, and thank you for coming to our capital budget deliberations, I'll call them. Just some housekeeping. I intend to have a morning break around 10:30. Lunch should be here by 12 o'clock, so we'll proceed under that schedule this morning for the most part. We do have some camera volunteers to cover today and whatever it takes tomorrow to wrap this up. Our volunteers are, again, and no surprise, Mr. Bill Jackson and Judy Ann McCauley, so we certainly recognize them. I know I have my cell phone with me. I'm going to check to make sure it doesn't ring loudly, and it won't, so that's good. And I would like to ask if there is any disclosure of pecuniary interest to declare at this time. I'll also say again, and you know this, that Councillor Jim Oliver and Councillor Mike Columbus are both on personal business and will not be in attendance today and tomorrow. Okay, so a few opening comments to get us going this morning. My comments will be very brief. I made a few notes here to say that this is the first of as you know, of 4 budgets we will be dealing with for 2018. December 5th, we're scheduled to do our rate operating budget, and then along with that is the Board of Health that evening, and then finally, as you know, the last Wednesday, well, it's not the last Wednesday, it's the second last Wednesday in January, the 24th would be the granddaddy. The operating budget is scheduled for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that week. We know from reading our summary here that we are looking at roughly a $38 million proposed capital budget for 2018 and a 10-year forecast schedule for about $366 million in the forecast through to 2027. I want to at this time thank our finance department, our Treasurer and General Manager of Finance, Mr. Johnson. I think this is extremely well done, whether we like what's in it or not. The format, the timing, the thoroughness of this, I personally feel is exceptionally well done. And of course, our manager of, I don't know your official title, financial planning, I think it's something along those lines. Kathy LaPlante certainly puts a lot of work into this and is here with James to answer our questions and help us through this procedure. We know that there is a proposed increase for the levy portion that supports this budget of roughly 1.5%. We'll get to that later. And my final comment is in reading through the first 25 pages, tab 1 as it's called, I think the finance department sums it up and hits the nail on the head pretty good, and I will quote them from page 23, quote, "The goal of balancing our immediate and future needs with affordability has become difficult," end of quote. I think that's the big challenge. Immediate and future needs, trying to address them, and at the same time be financially accountable. And that's a difficult act. So I couldn't say it better. Okay, having said that, I would like at this time, well, is there a member of council just has a brief opening comment similar to what I have? Councillor Sonnenberg, please.
Not a comment, but a question.
Yeah.
When we agree to the items in this document here today and tomorrow, which are engraved in granite and which are open for further review come operating budget time.
Yeah, I actually failed to mention that the levy-supported items would be obviously subject and would definitely be forwarded to the January because they have to be taken into consideration against all other operating costs that we have in our $80 million operating levy-supported budget. James, you wish to comment on that? I think that's a good point to be clear on what is in stone at the end of tomorrow and what will be subject to further possible debate. Yes, James?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The 2018 projects that we will be looking at today, that we will be approving in order to move forward, and there's several reasons for that in order for the related departments and divisions to get their tenders in and whatever they need to do to get it started for 2018. However, from 2019 to 2027, those are approved in principle, and it's part of our 10-year capital plan. And with that plan, we're able to do our funding calculations properly, and in order to financially sustain Norfolk County for those 10 years and make sure that we keep our debt in control, as well as you can see in some of the presentation, we will be talking about the reserve contributions and the 10-year forecast of those balances, and this is all part and parcel of that exercise.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion ahead. Mr. Cribbs, our county manager, I'll turn things over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good morning, Council. What brought us here today was a lot of hard work. The SLT began with a list from across the corporation for $51,378,000 worth of proposed capital projects for next calendar year. And over the course of 2 days and change, through analysis of those requests, the SLT was able to cut or defer $13,665,000 worth of those requests, leaving you today with $37,713,000 worth of proposed capital works for next calendar year. So 5113 cut takes you to 37. Last night, Councillor Height made a fairly reasonable request for a document that would show what specifically was cut. We sort of had meant to include that, and just sort of that got lost in the cracks. We're going to try to get that information to you today. Our only challenge is, of course, the senior leadership team from finance is in the room, but we are working on that, and ideally I'd like to have that to you by lunch, but we're going to get that to you in short order. What exactly short order means, I'm not 100% clear. We're working on that. At any rate, we have a process here this year where we're trying to slightly change and evolve. I understand, for instance, a small item, but my predecessor, it was his habit and approach to give you quite a large talk at this exact time. He would give you a very sort of complete document and view of his position on where we were going forward in the budgets. We're trying something different this year, which is why we have that special that budget day next month in November, to sort of look at everything holistically and have more of a conversation as opposed to sort of just information being thrown at you, to try to have more of a dialogue around the process in its totality. And this really is a transitional year in many ways. Your senior leadership team, Mr. Cridlin's now experiencing his second budget as GM. Mr. Yakov Sluchenkov is here on his first budget. He's now 1 month with us. This is my first budget with you as county manager, and although Mr. Johnson's been with us for about 4 years, this is his first budget as treasurer. So that's more than half your senior team. We're going through their first budget with you. And so we are trying a couple of new things, and I hope you forgive where we struggle with but that's sort of just part and parcel of being new to each other. So We have this new structure where we're going to try to do a lot of the sort of overview and the grandiose stuff on that budget day next month. Just to reiterate, though, we've cut $13 million in proposed capital works for next year, so you've got $37,700,000 and change to look at. We will get you the list today of the projects that we believe were appropriate to either defer or cut, as the case may be, and we're happy to answer the rationale as to why we've made those recommendations or those decisions. I don't envy you. You have a difficult task ahead of you for the next day or two. There are, like we say, unfortunately, part of this is a pay me now and pay me later. The last concept I'd like to leave you with is simply that most of the spending in capital is long-term. It's either from reserves or it's from debt that we plan to assume. Not a lot of it comes from levy. Accordingly, cuts that you make here would have an impact on future years, somewhere down the road on ultimately on levy, but in the here and now, these have very little immediate impact on next year's spending, simply because of how we choose to finance them and our corporate approach. That being said, I think those are the majority of my remarks. I'd like to, I think next on the agenda is our treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, David Cribbs, for that. Good morning. I'm looking forward to 2, possibly 1 day of capital budget deliberations. This is the first of 4 budgets, as David mentioned, that will be presented between now and the end of January. One of my mandates as the new treasurer is to provide transparent and accountable information to the mayor and council in order to make valuable decisions. As with every year, we tweaked this capital budget, but you will see it's very similar to last year. This is for 2 reasons. One is we felt the presentation last year was well done, and the other is that we are concentrating our efforts with the operating budget, as David mentioned. We are having that November meeting, and so that's where most of our efforts are being used. The capital budget presented to you today is the result of 3 months of data gathered and organized by about half a dozen finance staff. These finance staff gather information from all the departments and divisions in Norfolk County, including health and social services and also the library. This information has been reviewed by SLT, and the result, in my opinion, it is a financially sound 10-year capital plan. However, this is not without its challenges when it comes to funding. As Council recalls, the July 11th reserve report that was presented outlined our capital replacement reserve deficit situation, and as a result, through discussion on that day, we now have a financially responsible resolution that was passed to increase contributions. You will see from Kathy's presentation the results of these recommendations and how specifically the roads reserve, which is obviously the main issue, is still in the black at the end of 10 years. This is great news. However, we are nowhere near being done at looking at our reserve policy, and to ensure financial sustainability and to maintain our Standard & Poor's rating, there are other reserves that we want to look at in order to maintain financial sustainability. You can see that in the agenda, the capital project presentation is split into 3 sections. The first is replacements of assets, which should be a routine review, as these are already council-approved service levels, and these replacements were mostly identified in previous years' capital plans. The second area is replacements with enhancements, which, as the name implies, are assets replaced but with more value or expense. This could be due to a variety of reasons in which Kathy will elaborate during her presentation. The third area, new enhancements, would be the area where council would generally concentrate their efforts, as these are new and represent new services. So at this time, I would like to thank Kathy and her crew for pulling all this together. The mayor did thank me for putting this together. However, honestly, I had very little to do with it. So,
Correcting me, strike that thanks to James, and he had nothing to do with this whatsoever.
So-
Well, we'll see when this is over how much you have to do with it.
Exactly.
Thank you.
so at this time, I'd like to hand the mic over to Kathy LaPlante, where she will present the 2018 to 2027 capital budget.
James, I want to thank you for that, and we are now going to dive into this document before we get to tab 1, which is 1739. I can't remember. 1739 report. Kathy, take it away, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The last one that you'll be hearing from, and then you can dive into the binder and start over the next 2 days reviewing the 10-year capital plan for Norfolk County.
Kathy, would you just pull that microphone over a little bit towards James? Thank you.
So just before I start, I'd just like to mention that the presentation today is very informal. If there's any, throughout the presentation, if there's any questions or clarifications needed, we can address and provide those comments right away. We don't have to wait till the end of the presentation. I'll try not to, there's a lot of items that have been already addressed, and I will try not to repeat a lot of the items so that we can move on, but there are a few things that I would really like to still point out. The first item, as Mayor Luke had identified, we do 4 capital projects for Norfolk County. For those that are not familiar, we do the capital presentation first. We're always asked, why do we do the capital so early in the year? The reason generally is so that project managers can better plan for their projects, and also we can issue requests for proposals at non-peak times, hoping in the end that we receive preferential pricing on our capital projects. But generally, those are the 2 main reasons why we've moved the capital budget up to October, and we do it separate. And as mentioned before, also the next budget is presented in December. That is the rate budget. That allows us time to set the rates effective January 1st if needed, and also provides us enough time to let the ratepayers know of any rate changes. And then, of course, the levy budget is actually presented in the new year, which I believe it's January 24th, 25th, and 26th, the dates for this year. So we'll be diving into that budget, which is one of our large budgets that takes probably, I think we did 3 to 4 days on the levy budget. So the agenda for the presentation is it's not as long as it looks. Generally, the first 4 or 5 items, the information is in the financial services report, and it just basically a summary for those who are not familiar with the capital plan and how SLT developed the plan and the actual format of the capital plan. The one thing we wanted to mention that once we do review these few items, the next thing we'll be looking at is the actual capital plan and how we're funding the capital plan. Those are the slides that I'm sure Council's most interested in. So these first few slides you see, I'm going to zip through, but again, if you need me to stop, please do. So the first item is, first slide is what is a capital plan, and as we've mentioned before, you've seen these slides before, so they may be familiar to you. The capital plan generally outlines our spending plan for the next 10 years, including replacement of assets, assets required for expanded services, new assets, and assets to deal with growth. At a high level, the capital plan presents capital projects for programs for replacement of tangible capital assets, where the replacement of the tangible capital asset includes enhancements. These are presented separately as replacement plus enhancements. The new capital initiatives presents acquisition of new assets to either deal with growth or for the provision of a new expanded service. It also provides a summary of the financial plan to finance the proposed capital projects, and it also provides input into the operating capital plan. As Councillor Sonnenberg had indicated, there are a number of projects that will be brought forward during the levy and the rate budgets that are funded from actual tax levies or rates. We'll be reviewing them. They're also included in your capital budget document. And generally, just for SLT's review, as I believe James had mentioned, developing the capital plan was a collaborative process and involved virtually everyone from all departments. The process involves staff bringing forward capital requirements for replacements and enhancements and new initiatives. SLT and staff have reviewed these requests. They reviewed to make sure that the project can be completed in 2018, of course with the exception of infrastructure projects, which generally are projects that carry over a number of years. But they do look at the projects, for the infrastructure projects, maybe the engineering for 2018. The only thing I wanted to caution council about is the projects generally are budgeted in total in the year that the project is initiated. We do have a few items that do actually not follow that process, and again, that is the engineering projects. And again, the proposed format, it's set up related to, back in 2009, the Public Sector Accounting Board set some reporting requirements for municipalities. So our actual capital format focuses on replacements of tangible capital assets, any major repairs or rehabilitation to extend the life of TCAs, and new TCAs for growth or new or expanded services. Generally, the capital plan excludes studies, or any costs that are just repair in nature. Those items are actually included in your operating budget.
Kathy, thank you. Council, if I'm watching my book or daydreaming, just call my name out, please, to ask questions. Go ahead, Councillor Black, my apologies.
Okay.
I'll try to catch your hands.
Yeah, thank you. Kathy, you did mention something that actually has been confusing me about when you budget roads. And I tried to get this straight talking to Jeff DeMilameister the other day. I still don't know if it's straight in my mind. Like when you look at the budget for roads, sometimes they're deferred, and yet they show up again in the next year's budget. And I guess my question is, well, I thought that was already included in the previous year's budget, so why is it in this year's budget? So do you understand what I'm talking about here? It seems to me that there's a duplication. Like, why would it show up again in the next year's budget when we already budgeted for it in the previous year? So I don't know where my confusion is there, but
I believe the issue is when we have I think it was just last year we changed the process. Prior to that, if a infrastructure project, roads, water and wastewater, was for $5 million, but again, you do the engineering part in the current year and the construction would be phased in over 2 or 3 years, the full amount of the capital project was budgeted in the current year that it was initiated or planned to initiate the review or the engineering, etc. Last year was the first year we changed that, where we started to budget just for the engineering in the current year that the engineering was going to be completed, and we've budgeted the construction in future years. I just wanted to, I'm not sure if there's any roads projects necessarily specific to that, but if a project hasn't been initiated for example, in 2017, generally we cancel that project and rebudget the project to reprioritize it with the new capital plan. So
okay, yeah, I know it does get confusing for me, and I'm thinking specifically like Holden Ave was budgeted, and then I don't know if it was canceled because some other higher priority roads like Main Street and Port Dover, became the high priority. So that got bumped. So I thought, well, we already budgeted it in that year. Why do we see it again in another year? And maybe that's your answer, is that it was canceled and then rebudgeted.
I'm going to ask Lee, if I may, to speak to Holden. It's a good question. Lee, please.
Through the mayor to council, with respect to Holden Ave, what you saw was Holden was budgeted last year. That was the engineering work. The engineering work is just about complete. So the budget that you're looking at this year is for the construction of it. So Holden Ave was historically in a 10-year forecast, and it has been moved around. I think as council will recall, when I started with Norfolk County, we had a historic, huge backlog of projects and not enough staff to complete what was coming forward in the capital program. So we redid the entire capital program to ensure that we were putting forward the amount of work we could actually undertake in a year. So the forecasted years beyond sort of next year, they do move around depending on additional information. Sometimes we have a bad year and a section of the road goes, so we'll move it around in the capital forecast, all that sort of stuff. But you will see two parts for the majority of capital projects with respect to road reconstruction. With all of the approvals and everything we need in place now, we can't budget, design, tender it, and construct it all within one calendar year. So therefore, we've started budgeting the engineering in advance. We do the engineering one year, we do the construction the following year. If we need to bump the construction in order to make budget numbers work, the engineering basically sits on a shelf, and then we'll pull it back out 2 years later and do that. It also puts us in a much better position to avail ourselves of any grants. Lots of times, provincial and federal funding requires projects to be shovel-ready. Having projects where the engineering is complete and we're able to construct them immediately does put us in a much better opportunity to take advantage of any money that may come out there.
Thank you, Councillor Bott.
Thank you.
Kathy? Microphone, please, sorry.
If we're specifically looking at Norfolk County's proposed capital budget, it's similar to the last prior years. It's presented again in 4 separate categories. The format was developed a few years ago, and it seems to work well for council's review. These categories include, the first category is replacement of capital assets. This category is the major. As we work through the slides, you'll note that this is the major category, and it strictly includes replacement for replacement and includes major repairs that extend the useful life of the asset. It also includes what we call programs, and this meaning to us is that there's an ongoing annual replacement of assets. Some examples of that would be our technology program. There's an annual need to replace computers, printers, etc. Another example would be the roof replacement program. We have a number of facilities throughout Norfolk County that require roof replacements on a regular basis. So we call these programs because every year there'll be costs associated with the replacement. Generally, there's some inventory, there's some building assessments to back up any of these replacement programs. Enhancements for replacing not like-for-like items. An example would be replacing a smart car with a 4x4 pickup truck, for example. We consider that an enhancement. Some items are beyond our control for when it's just replacements because sometimes the standards have changed, so you can't replacement for like items, but because of standard changes, we still consider those items just replacements and not an enhancement. So there is a fine line between those two items. The third area are new items, and they're the TCAs, the tangible capital assets, to address growth or to provide new services to residents. And the last area you'll notice is the summary of the request for the library board. Just on a note of that, the library staff are available if council does have any questions. Generally, they do make a deputation, but I believe they're not going to be able to make any attendance this year. But staff are available if council has any questions or concerns. The next area is to review the capital financing. Norfolk County does have currently has a policy, a financing policy. It establishes the financing principle for funding capital expenditures. The capital plan has been developed based on these principles, with one exception that I'll mention in a few minutes. Again, replacements of tangible capital assets. The policy basically states that tangible capital assets replacements should be funded from capital reserves and reserve funds established for that purpose. An example of that, again, would be the fleet equipment pool is set up to replace the fleet equipment. Acquisition of new assets should not be funded from replacement of reserves and reserve funds. They're funded from other funding or new revenues. Funding sources include donations, government grants, or debenture issues. It should not be funded from a replacement reserve or reserve fund. One exception, as I mentioned before, a number of years ago, it was decided with council approval for bridges. Given the long life cycles of bridges, 60 or more years, bridges have now been funded from debt to spread the costs over future generations who will benefit. Yep, go ahead.
There's two very good examples of the types of funding that we do. When we had David Cribbs on a stretcher outside, we were talking about a new enhancement for stretchers. And that new enhancement is not funded from the EMS reserve because it's a new item. So therefore, we have to go to another form of funding. And I believe in this case, we used another WSIB reserve, and we had reasons for that. Therefore, when we replace those new stretchers, we will use the EMS reserve because that's what it's for. It's for capital replacement. However, what we need to do is to recalculate what our contributions to that reserve needs to be in order to anticipate this extra piece of equipment that we're replacing. Another example that came up last night, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, is the Evergreen Hill topic. That, again, there's a road there that's going to be replaced. Therefore, we're using the roads reserve to replace it. However, the sidewalk is a new enhancement, so we need to find other funding for the sidewalk portion. So those are two examples that we have gone through in the last 6 months with council, and hopefully that makes what Kathy said a little bit more clear.
The financing policy that we do have, I just wanted to mention also that council may recall the report that came, that was presented to them in July, the repositioning of the reserves and reserve funds. One of our commitments is to actually look at our current financing policy and develop and update the current policy. So we may see some changes at that point in time. However, the capital plan has basically been presented based on our current policy and the recommendations that have been included in the report FS 1726 from July. Funding for the projects contained in the 2018 capital plan is based upon the following assumptions. As stated previously, proposed projects are included in the proposed capital plan for the most part in total for the year the project is planned or initiated. Funding also follows the same assumption. Funding is provided from the appropriate reserve and reserve funds as required in the project that is initiated. Where sufficient funds are available in that reserve or reserve fund, whether or not, except for bridges, again, that was the only exception that we have made over the years. So funding is provided from the appropriate reserve. If funding is allocated to the project year basis, to match the initiation of the project, and is not allocated on a cash flow basis. Again, I'm saying that the funding is following the, within the capital plan, the funding is following the actual project dates that is initiated. So if the project is budgeted for in 2019, the planned funding in the capital plan is for 2019. The project may not actually need to be funded until 2020 or 2021, which shifts when we get it further into the charts. That's where you'll notice that the funding those charts will definitely change depending on the cash flow and how projects are actually completed. So the next slide here, when we look at this slide here, it shows the summary of the capital plan based on the 4 categories that we just spoke about. The olive green color is replacement of the capital assets. It is the largest component of our capital plan. If you look at the table above, the replacements represent a significant amount of $308 million, or 77% of our overall plan. The enhancements are located, it's this gray area here, that's the replacements with enhancements. It represents 5% of the overall plan, but that still amounts to $19.9 million. If you combine both the replacements of capital assets and replacement with enhancements, both of them total $327.9 million. Generally, the increase, you'll notice that the 2007 approved plan was $331 million, and our current request is $403.5 million. In the report, I believe there is a table that outlines some of the major drivers. The difference of $73.7 million is mainly due to the Lake Erie water supply and interconnections, totaling $39.6 million. The increase in bridge and road construction was the Long Point Road construction bridge is $6.2 million. There's some additional projects this year for adding arena dressing rooms, $4.5 million. There's a number of other projects also listed on that, but that is a few of the higher level projects.
Councillor Height, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Kathy. The Lake Erie connection project that you spoke of, I remember it always used to appear in our budget documents, and for a price tag of like $80 million. I thought that our former treasurer, John Ford, did away with that entire project, not leaving 30-some million in it.
Did you want to answer? Lee will answer that for you.
Lee?
Through the Mayor to Council, with respect to that project, you are correct. We did eliminate that project in anticipation of the Integrated Sustainable Master Plan that was coming forward. The projects recommended that from the Integrated Sustainable Master Plan have been included in this budget, and that's why you're seeing some of those other projects coming forward now.
Thank you, Kathy. Oh, sorry, Councillor Brunton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that, Lee, are you saying too that, are we going to have another report when we do the water and sewer budget to talk about this interconnect or integration? Will that be coming in a separate report?
Through the Mayor to Council, we are discussing the capital projects in the next 2 days. Those include both the water, wastewater, as well as all of the levy-funded projects. So we'll be discussing them now.
Okay, but I understood that we were going to get a report on, like, the interconnect, do we look at interconnecting Waterford with Simcoe or for water supply, things like that. I understood Mr. Fields provided us with a memo a few months back. Is there a report coming on that?
Council has already received the Integrated Sustainable Master Plan, which was the report that articulated what we were going to do. Mr. Houghton was here that day and spoke with Council about all of the variety of things that were involved in that. And we had the maps and all of that sort of stuff that was provided to Council when you accepted the Integrated Sustainable Master Plan. So that's what talked about all of the integration. The projects outlined here were what was included in the Integrated Sustainable Master Plan that Council already accepted.
How long ago was that? I must have missed that.
I believe that you were here for that conversation. That was maybe November of last year, because it was after the capital budget but before the new year. So I would say it was probably November, late November, early December, but that was certainly discussed as part of that. We had some maps that were provided at that time, et cetera, to Council, showing the proposals, et cetera, with respect to the interconnection. So staff have included those things in the Integrated Sustainable Master Plan and the capital forecast.
Okay, I must have missed it because I don't recall, so thank you.
Just to carry on with this slide here, I just wanted to point out one of the pinky color area, it's more of a rose color area, are the new capital initiatives. They represent over $70 million, and as you noticed, in 2003, it peaks very high. That is the Lake Erie Water Supplying Interconnections project, and you are correct that a number of years ago, we had such a peak. It was earlier in the years related to the central water system, which was removed. So last year, this wasn't included in the project or in our capital plan, and now you do see it. So what we'd like to point out, though, when it comes to the new capital initiatives, again, these are the areas that they're either to expand services or they're related to growth. This is the area that hopefully council will spend some time on. We are expanding our levels of service, a number of the items. And these generally are not funded from reserves or reserve funds. They're generally funded from debt because there's no available funding. There may be some provincial or federal grant funding down the road, but if we're unsure of any available funding from the provincial or federal governments, that has not been included for funding for the new initiatives.
Councillor Black?
Thank you, Mayor Luke. And I guess maybe to Lee, the old capital project, did that water supply not come from Haldeman and Nanticoke, and now this new one is different, that the water supply would come from a different spot? Wasn't that former plan kind of mixed in with Haldeman and coming from the east, and we canceled that, and now this new one through the integrated plan is coming from a different location?
Through the mayor to council, many years ago, I'm going to say probably in the vicinity of 10, 12 years ago, there was a push on for a Lake Erie water supply on a regional level that would be taking a big pipe up to the Waterloo region. And it would be coming likely from the Nanticoke area, and it would be going basically through Norfolk County, through Brant County, up into the region. And so we had money in our capital budget to include our connections and our contribution to said project. Further to that, the region of Waterloo did a whole bunch of rejigging with their water supplies, how they were doing things, et cetera, and took the need for that said big pipe and pushed it out by at least 30 years. As such, we would not get the economies of scale, and Norfolk County and Brant County combined are not able to afford that kind of a solution. As such, when they did the Integrated Sustainable Master Plan, what they looked at was, instead of bringing a big pipe out of, say, Nanticoke, et cetera, what they're proposing is interconnecting a few different water systems and upgrading some of our lake source supplies, so that if we have a problem with, say, the wells in Simcoe, we can disconnect those wells from the system, and we can still have the entire Simcoe system fed from a different water supply, say Port Dover. Same with Waterford. It wouldn't eliminate the groundwater wells in Waterford, but the pipe connecting it would allow us to use a different source of water. So that's what's being proposed going forward here. It's not going to create a single water system for Norfolk County. It's going to create interconnections in between our systems, so that should we need to draw water from other areas, we have the ability to do that. As council will recall, the groundwater supply in Simcoe, we have been looking with not much success for the last 5-ish years for additional water supply. We are experiencing extreme difficulties with our current groundwater wells, and we really have been unsuccessful in terms of finding another source. This would allow us to tap into Port Dover, to use the lake supply in Port Dover to help provide water for the Simcoe system. We have been looking unsuccessfully for groundwater sort of all over the Simcoe area. Meanwhile, if we look slightly to the south, we have a huge supply of water that's sitting out in the lake.
Quality versus quantity. Anyway, that makes the picture a little clearer, but muddier if it's coming from Lake Erie.
Okay, Kathy, continue, please.
Thank you. So the slide we were just looking at presents the capital plan by the four major categories that we've been talking about. The next slide, it's summarizing how this capital plan is being paid by major categories of funding. The piece at the bottom, again, the olive color, are the tax-supported capital projects, either coming from tax levies or reserves and reserve funds related to tax levies. Again, you can see this totals a significant portion of the capital plan, $270 million. It represents what we are funding from the tax-supported levy side of the house. The next area, the lighter pink area in the middle, represents $116.2 million, and it's for the water and wastewater rate supported capital projects. And the growth-related projects total, which is the darker green area, totals $14.6 million. And these are generally primarily projects that are funded from development charge, currently funded from our development charge study. So then when we look at the various funding sources for the proposed capital plan, again, the largest portion of funding, of $256 million, is for replacement of capital assets. Again, this does not include bridges. Bridges are funded from debenture finances. The next largest funding source is from debt financing, which is $91.3 million, or 23% of our capital plan. The growth-related portion, related development charges, total $14.6 million. External financing is $26 million. And lastly, as you see at the bottom, the amount funded from levy and rates. Over the 10-year plan, it's planned for $14 million to be funded from the tax levy and $1 million from water and wastewater rates. These projects are proposed to be funded from the tax levy or the rates, and there are no other, as a result, as there's no other sources of funding for these individual projects, and they're generally smaller projects.
Councillor Height first.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Through you to Kathy. Where does our investment income from the legacy fund appear in this column?
The investment income, for the is not included. It's this is where they're funded from the projects are funded from the reserves and the reserve funds, and I believe if from the capital plan. From the report that we presented in July, the $2 million, I believe you're talking about the investment interest. Okay, the $2 million investment interest is actually, the recommendation within the report was to apply that against the road reserve to help reduce the deficit in that reserve.
I thought so. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Brunton.
I just want to get some things clear on the debt financing, and I asked this question earlier. In 2017, James, we debentured 17 million or 19 million? 16? I don't know, what was the figure? I thought it was 19.
It's around 16. I'm not 100. I'd have to get you the amount. Sorry, I don't have it at the exact amount, but it was over $16 million, I believe.
Sorry?
It was over $16 million.
Yeah, I 19 rang a bell.
Yeah,
but,
that sounds familiar too.
Yeah, the amount of money or projects we're doing in 2018, they will be, any debentures will be done in 2018, correct? If they're completed.
Through the mayor to Councillor Brunton. For 2018, we do have some projects that are underway. However, the projects are not completed. So at this point in time, there's no planned debenture issue for 2018.
None.
Not for 2018 at this time. We do anticipate a debenture issue in 2019.
Okay, and that's my question. Like, and I think of some major projects that I understand we are going to debenture. One is Dingle Creek, one is the oil spill problem up on the highway. We don't know what those end figures will be. How do you just wait to see when those projects are complete then and add that debt to our overall picture? Or are you showing some of that now in the debt only is what's current or what's been put out for financing. Is that a safe way to put it?
That's correct. The information that we're showing you right now on this slide is the proposed planned debt for the next 10 years. It doesn't include the debt for any projects 2017 or prior.
Okay, so I realize what we're looking at in this capital budget, but my concern is there's a lot of projects that are backlogged, that are in midstream or not yet completed, if you want to call it that, and there will be substantial debt with those. So we don't see them right yet, do we, until they're completed? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Further questions at this time? Well, we'll move on.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I can just add to that, when we do issue debt, it has to be project-specific, so that's another reason why it's difficult to predict. It's because we got to wait for the project to be completed, and then there's some steps to be taken in order to get debt issued, and it is project-specific. We have to provide some material, and we have to get a legal opinion on some of those items before we can get the debt issue.
If I may, Mayor Luke, and that's somewhat my concern. Like, we look at this and we say, okay, based on if we approve this whole budget today, the debt will increase so much, we'll say, if everything fell into place. But there are these projects that are backlogged that we really don't have a handle on, and some of them are substantial. So that's an increase over and above what we're looking at today, and that's what I guess it bothers me, that it's easy to create debt, but sooner or later you got to pay it back. So anyways, thank you.
And I guess a comment I would have, Councillor Brunton, and again, we all approach this from a different angle. I certainly in agreement with you that, you know, we have a lot of outstanding capital projects from the past, for whatever reason, have not been put into the picture. But again, this 10-year capital forecast is a planning document. Last year, $9 million was removed from SLT from the 10-year document. The year before, I can't remember how much it was, but it was reduced considerably. So just because we're looking at 10 years ahead and looking at these huge figures, when we get to the individual year, the current year, in other words, 2018 right now, that number can change. These are just things that SLT and staff feel that we need to be looking ahead and sort of getting on the board, because they will eventually have to be done. It'll be up to us whether we reduce those or not. So I don't get too alarmed when I see these numbers, although they are a little bit mind-boggling on what capital projects are proposed over the next 10 years. No question. But to be quite honest with you, I'm not too overly concerned at the moment about 2027. I recognize that the picture doesn't look great, but, you know, I'm just saying I'm not as overly concerned what's going to happen 8 or 10 years from now. Anyhow.
Your Worship, if I may, I guess when I look at a lot of these projects and the roads construction reserve comes to mind, it's the way I read this is $22.5 million in the hole. Yet we keep adding to it, and that bothers me. You know, it's, and if you look at, and I'm looking at page 4-1 in our binder here, and it's a list of the reserve funds, and again, you know, like. Maybe it's time to put the brakes on. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.
I'm not going to get in that debate at the moment, but that's exactly what this exercise is for this council to decide how far we want to go and how far we want to cut back, or somewhere in the middle. So your point is excellent. There's no question. When you look ahead at the debentures, it isn't pretty. There's no question. And reserves, you know, we're making some steps to kind of correct what's happening there. Did I see another hand, Councillor Wells, I believe?
Yourself, Mr. Mayor. If we are worried about where we're going, it is the people around this table that have control over where we're going.
Absolutely.
And we continually be like our two government powers above us, continually take on more debt, more debt, more debt, more debt, expecting Santa Claus to come. There is no Santa Claus.
Hey.
Just for clarification for Councillor Brunton, in the next few slides, we'll probably maybe talking about a few of the items that you've just been mentioning also. I just wanted to mention that also that what you're seeing is in a point in time. It's based on the current capital plan that we have. For example, the debt financing I had mentioned